Everyone's got a different definition of wellness. So guess what? I get to give you mine. And it's as valid as any of yours, except I've got data. So it is metabolic health, mental health, and financial health. That's the definition of wellness. And what I will do is I will try to prove to you that all of those are the case, and that when they're not the case, you are friggin' screwed. Thank you all. And I know that most of you are psychiatrists, nutritionists, general practitioners, functional medicine specialists, so this will be near and dear to your heart. This is actually a practice run for a talk I'm going to give at a meeting that Kiki and I go to, the Integrative Medicine and Mental Health Conference that will be in Chicago in August. So feedback is appreciated. Okay, so I can tweak it.
We're the guinea pigs.
Yeah, you're the guinea pigs, that's right. So, question. What's the definition of wellness?
Traditionally, the absence of disease, isn't it?
So, that's the standard definition, is the definition of wellness is the absence of illness. There is no definition, okay? That's the problem. That's part of the problem. Everyone's got a different definition of wellness. So guess what? I get to give you mine. And it's as valid as any of yours, except I've got data. So it is metabolic health, mental health, and financial health. That's the definition of wellness. And what I will do is I will try to prove to you that all of those are the case, and that when they're not the case, you are friggin' screwed. And why? That's what we're going to talk about today. So, I'm actually in Paris this next 6 months. I've been there for a month. I'm going to be there for another 5. I am on a Fulbright. We are developing at the Center for Research and Interdisciplinarity a curriculum and set of materials to try to combat technology addiction in children, which sometime I can talk to you about as well. In addition, I am working with a robotics professor at ETIS, which is their electronics institute at the Université de Cergy-Pontoise. We are developing an addicted robot. Swear to God, so cool. And also, I'm here in part with the good graces and auspices of the Center for Humane Technology, which is a startup that was started by Tristan Harris, who is the former Google design ethicist, and Roger McNamee, who was the mentor to Mark Zuckerberg. He's the one who introduced her to Sheryl Sandberg and tried to stop what happened in 2016. Was unsuccessful. And so they together have started the Center for Humane Technology to try to undo the damage that is being done by technology. And I am an advisor to that regarding technology addiction. So we will talk about that briefly today. It's not the only thing we'll talk about, but it will be one of the things. So let's start with metabolic health. This paper came out in 2001 based on 2000 data. It was in Nature, and it quantitated the number of type 2 diabetics around the world at the time, 151 million. And what was projected for the next 10 years, a decade later, was going to be 221 million, a 46% increase for an annualized inflation rate of 3.88%. That is not what we saw. What we actually saw was 285 million for an annualized inflation rate of 6.55%, a doubling over what was anticipated. And by 2014, we were up to 422 million for an annualized inflation rate of 10.3%, a tripling. WTF. That's a British term, right? How can it be accelerating as we know that this problem exists and are trying to do something about it? The only way to explain this is that doctors are causing diabetes. And there's some truth to that. And I will show you why. In fact, people are very, very, very happy and excited about the decrease in heart disease. It's not that there's decrease in heart disease, it's just that there's a decrease in deaths from heart disease because of statins. And there's some truth to that. On the other hand, look what's happened instead. And the question is, are they related? We'll talk a little bit about that. Well, here are the UK costs for diabetes. Here, right now, you are spending $17 billion for 4.5 million diabetics. That is £4,000 per patient. And you are getting off scot-free because in America, it's $10,000 per patient. Okay? So, you know, it's cheap to have diabetes here, relatively. Okay? The point is that if you look at where healthcare costs are going, they're not going to the hospital in red. They're not going to the physician in green. They're not going to pharma in blue. Okay? If you look at in purple, if you look at the blue line, okay, that's way more than all the other three put together, and the difference is all going to chronic metabolic disease care. So this is breaking your bank. And all you have to do is ask anybody who works for the NHS. Anybody here work for the NHS? A few of you, I think. Okay? You know what's going on. Okay? So this is near and dear to your heart. So this is the real problem. Right? Everybody's waiting for the pill. Where's the pill? Okay. What I'm here to tell you is there is no pill. There will never be a pill. There can't be a pill. Because when you actually look at the subcellular pathologies that are causing non-communicable chronic disease, they're not druggable. They're foodable, but they're not druggable. There will never be a pill. It's not possible for there to be a pill. You have to understand what's wrong in order to fix it. You cannot solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is. And that's what tonight is about. What is the problem? Well, this is affecting Social Security too. So you all know that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, right? Okay? All the young, healthy people pay in so that the old, infirm people at the top can take out. But what if the young, healthy people aren't healthy? What if they're in fact sick? What if they're not paying in? What if they're taking out because they're all on dialysis or they're all amputated? Which is what's happening. Okay? The whole pyramid collapses, and that's why the Congressional Budget Office in the United States says that by 2029, we will have to reduce Social Security benefits by 29% in order to just be able to break even, because we will have basically outspent the money that's coming in. Okay? Which was not what Social Security was designed to do. That's where we are. And this has real impact because we are seeing that life expectancy is now going in reverse in the United States. 4 years in a row, we had a decline in life expectancy, although I did see 2 days ago that actually stabilized out for this past year. Well, that's good, but not going in the other direction. And there's the USA in terms of life expectancy. And you know what? All of these, excuse my French, shithole countries aren't you catching up to us? So that makes us a shithole country because they're catching up to us. So on this slide, we see life expectancy plotted against healthcare expenditures. And you'll notice from 1970 at the beginning all the way to 2015. And what you'll notice is, you know, you guys here, you're in the middle of the pack. You know, you're not doing as well as you used to, but no one is. You're sort of in the middle. But take a look at us. Okay, we suck. I mean, we just suck. Because we are spending boatloads, and what are we getting for it? Nada. In fact, if anything, we're killing people. We're spending money and killing people. So what are we killing them from? So if you look here at the death rates for the UK, Canada, Australia, Sweden, France, yeah, we're all going down over time, which is good. And even for US Hispanics, they're going down, which is kind of amazing in blue. But take a look at what's going on with the US whites. Going up. So what are these people dying of? They're dying of poisonings, diabetes, suicides, and liver disease. The diseases of despair. Okay? They're not all killing themselves, but they're killing themselves. One way or the other. They're killing themselves. Whether they take their own life or whether they take something that ultimately takes their own life, they're all dying of despair. And that's what tonight's about. Because wellness is the opposite of despair. In fact, U.S. suicide rates are up 30% in the United States, and only half of the people who commit suicide were known to have a mental health problem. So that means there are a lot of unhappy people around that aren't diagnosed. Deaths from heroin up, deaths from cocaine up, deaths from benzos up, and it's really hard to die from benzos because of its therapeutic window. So, I mean, you have to work at it. So here's the United States deaths of despair going up fourfold in a 25-year period. Fourfold. So you say, well, yeah, but this is the UK. Well, you've got a 60% increase. So you're not as bad as us. But, you know, don't take any stock in that. Okay, you're screwed too. Illicit drug use is up here too, especially in older adults. It's like, don't older adults know better? It's like if teenagers do it, it's kind of like, well, they're teenagers. If young adults do it, well, you know, they're worried about the future. But like older adults are doing illicit drugs. And here's really, this is awful. Okay, this is alcohol use, up 49.4% over the course of a 10-year period, especially in women. And take a look at the age group. Okay? It's older women. Older women are becoming alcoholics. My ex-wife is an alcoholic. So what's going on with you old women?
Living longer, hormones.
All right.
Hormones. Bored.
How about teen depression? So here are children's hospital admissions in the United States due to suicidal ideation. Notice the 5 to 11-year-olds, not so much, but look at the 12 to 14 and the 15 to 17-year-olds, way up. And here are the outpatient encounters, tripling in the span of 8 years, happens to be the 8 years of the iPhone. And it's not just outpatient admissions, they actually commit suicide. So here we have death rates in children ages 10 to 14, and you'll notice the motor vehicle accident rate has gotten cut in half because of crumple zones and, you know, all sorts of other, things that we've done to try to, and car seats and stuff like that. So what's supplanted it is suicides. There are actually now more suicides in the 10 to 14-year-old age group than there are kids who die of car accidents. Now, how effed up is that? There's the advent of the iPhone. And that's not just true for 10 to 14-year-olds, it's true for 15 to 19-year-olds too. Antidepressant use is up. Now what's interesting is antidepressant use is down in 7 states. They happen to be the 7 states where marijuana was legalized. And the amount of marijuana use correlates inversely with the amount of SSRI use. So people are basically choosing one anti-anxiety agent over another. One that they can control and pay for out of pocket versus one they need a doctor for. But it's not just an American problem because this is a world problem. The WHO now says that 4.4% of the entire world is now clinically depressed. And 18.5% increase over a 10-year period. And this is not sampling bias. This is not better reporting. This is all adjusted for. Okay, do I have your attention? Do we have a problem?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, we got a problem. Okay, and we don't know what the problem is. So you think you're going to get wellness out of that? Forget it. Our metabolic health is going down the friggin' tubes. Our mental health is going down the friggin' tubes. And our money, our financial health, is going down the friggin' tubes too. Okay, I would say this is the opposite of wellness. Yes? Fair? Okay, good. So, Is this coincidence, or are these three things related? Now, there are several doctors out there, some in this room, who have postulated there's a relationship between at least metabolic and mental health. And then, of course, the financial health would be sort of an epiphenomenon that come along with that. And here are some books on the subject. Emmer and Meyer, The Mind-Gut Connection. My colleague Bill Wilson, who wrote Brain Drain recently, very interesting. David Perlmutter's a neurologist, wrote Brain Maker, Brain Changer from Felice Jacka down in Australia. And there's even an annual conference, which I'm going to give this talk in. And Kiki and I are going to go in August, and we're going to tie one on in Chicago. Okay, we're going to have like a Chicago deep dish gluten-free pizza. I don't know how we're going to do that. All right, so does metabolic health influence mental health? And the answer is absolutely. Through what mechanisms? Well, insulin resistance is a big one, because insulin resistance means you're not getting energy where you need to because insulin's not doing its job. And in fact, insulin resistance leads ultimately to depression through various mechanisms having to do with whether or not your brain's mitochondria are working right. And they're not. And I'll show you why in a minute. This is interesting. This came out very recently. Reaction time, which basically tells you how well your brain's working, it correlates not with BMI, not with obesity. Everyone's assumed, well, obese people are just friggin' slow. No. It's not about that at all. It's about the inflammation. It's about the IL-6 levels. Okay? And you can see the reaction time against BMI at the top, reaction time against IL-6, much tighter. Okay? And you can see young, old, low BMI, high BMI, you can see the data. Bottom line, it's the inflammation. And when you actually do the multivariate linear regression analysis, you can see that it's not the BMI, because look at the beta coefficient compared to the effect of the IL-6, much better. Okay, so it's actually the inflammation that's driving this. That's the metabolic health. So this is not about obesity. Thin people get sick too. In fact, 40% of normal weight people have the exact same diseases as do the obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia too. Now they get it at a lower rate than the obese. Okay, so for sure, obesity is a risk factor, and I don't argue that. But if normal weight people get it too, how can it be about obesity? And if normal weight people get it too, how can it be about behavior? Because they're not eating too much and exercising too little because they're normal weight. At least according to the standard mantra of, quote, energy balance, which is a piece of crap. Okay? And that's what I'm trying to dispel. My job is to kill the calorie. Because calories don't work. They never did. Okay? And I can give you all the reasons why they don't work, except we'd be here 5 hours. Metabolic health, mental health, financial health. What's the relation? What's the causation? Which comes first? I mean, you could make an argument for any one of them coming first. You know, it can go in any direction you'd like. Or is there some other factor that's affecting all of them? That's the question. So everybody's very comfortable with the idea of metabolic health influencing mental health, or mental health influencing metabolic health, blah, blah, blah. You know what? You're all wrong. There's something else. And that's why the secret to wellness is identifying the illness. So the question is, what is it? So, everyone wants to be happy, and we're not. So my question is, does unhappiness kill you? Yes, no. Do you die from unhappiness?
Yes.
No, you do not. You do not die from unhappiness. There are a lot of curmudgeons out there who are 100 years old. In fact, the meaner you are, the longer you live. And there's some truth to that.
That's so sad.
Okay, it's so sad, it is. So this study, which came from the UK, the Million Women Study, you've probably heard of it. Okay, so this is a paper that was published in 2016. I'm just going to read you, this is the findings. After adjustment for self-rated health, treatment for hypertension, diabetes, asthma, arthritis, depression, or anxiety, in other words, all the chronic diseases, okay, and several socioeconomic and lifestyle factors, including smoking, deprivation, body mass index, so all the, cofactors that you have to take into account when you do this kind of adjustment. Unhappiness was not associated with mortality from all causes, from ischemic heart disease or from cancer. Findings were similarly null for related measures such as stress or lack of control. Okay? Unhappiness does not kill you. Alone. Not alone. This is a paper that just came out last year. Happiness and longevity. Unhappy people die young, otherwise unhappiness probably makes no difference. That is the dumbest title for a paper I have ever heard. Nonetheless, the data are the data, okay? And what it says is, yes, the people at the very, very lowest level of unhappiness do seem to die young. But everyone else doesn't matter. There's no relationship once you take out the bottom end of the standard deviation curve.
The miserable.
The truly miserable. Basically what they're saying is none of those things that we normally ascribe to the reason for death actually has anything to do with it. So, the moral of the story is unhappiness in and of itself does not kill. It's what we do to get happy that kills. It's the pleasure, stupid. Okay? And when you think about all the things that we get pleasure from, they all come with a toxic side effect called death. So, here are the devils you know. And there's an aholic after every one of these. Chemical addictions, we have behavioral addictions. Chemical addictions such as nicotine, alcohol, cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, all will kill you. And we have behavioral addictions. Shopping, I don't know if it'll kill you, but you know. Gambling, pornography, exercise addiction, you know. Gaming. And then, of course, we have the addictions we don't know are addictions, like this one. So National Geographic said it. I didn't say it. It says, why we can't resist it. So we know that sugar causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is now the leading cause of liver transplant in the United States, having overtaken hepatitis C. Okay, and this is a disease of despair, because it is due to sugar, not alcohol. Ultra-processed food correlates with depression. So when people are sad, or people are anxious, or people are unhappy, what do? They eat shit. And that's what kills you. It's not the unhappiness that kills you, it's the eating the shit that kills you. So this, now I'm going to play the clip. 20 seconds, you're going to love it, and you're going to recognize it. Here we go.
I couldn't get through a day without doing something to alter my consciousness. And it started with heroin. It started with sugar. Sugar? Oh yeah, when I was 5, 6 years old, I was cramming sugar down my throat as fast as I could get it down. Sweets, sugar on bread and butter. I became addicted to sugar because it changed the way I felt.
It's a gateway drug.
It's a gateway drug. Indeed it is. That's right. And it's not wasted on you. This group understands that. Yes, sugar is a gateway drug, and we give it to 15-month-olds. Or we give it to 6-month-olds. We give it to babies. In fact, we give it to fetuses. And somehow expect that they'll turn out just fine. Except they're not turning out just fine. So let me go back to that slide. So, Dr. Griffiths here is a mitochondriologist, and he will appreciate this, and those of you who understand what mitochondria are will appreciate this. Sugar is 2 molecules at the same time. One's called glucose, one's called fructose. Glucose is the energy of life. Glucose, every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so friggin' important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it. Okay, called gluconeogenesis. So even keto people still have a serum glucose level. Everyone has a serum glucose level. Whether you consume it or not, you have one because your liver needs to make it for the rest of your body to function. Okay? So you don't need sugar to live, you need a blood glucose to live, but you don't need dietary sugar to live, which is what the food industry tells you, which is not true. Okay? So glucose, for lack of a better word, we will call good. It's not really, but we'll call it that for the moment. On the other hand, then there's this other molecule called fructose. Now, fructose is not glucose. Fructose is sweet. Fructose is the molecule we seek. Fructose is why we like sugar. Okay? Has anybody ever tasted sugar without fructose? It's called molasses. Now, who here likes molasses?
I do.
It's all right. Maybe in a cookie. Yeah.
Not really.
Not really. Yeah, right. Not very interesting. Okay? But, add some fructose to it. That's the point. That's the point. Fructose is addictive, and we have the data to demonstrate how that is and why that is. The problem is fructose is not just addictive, it's toxic. And how is it toxic? Because fructose changes your genes in a completely different way than glucose changes your genes. And what fructose does is it actually inhibits beta oxidation at the level of a mitochondria, as opposed to glucose, which stimulates it. So fructose shuts down that energy metabolism we talked about before, compared to glucose, which actually stimulates it. So glucose is not the problem. Yes, insulin is a problem, so insulin resistance can come from, too much pasta, which is glucose. But fructose is very specific. And it does this in the liver, and it also does this in the brain. Okay? So it's a real thing. And Ron Kahn, who is the CEO of Joslin Diabetes Center at Harvard in Boston, okay, it took him 3 decades, but we finally got him to admit, and this is his quote after this paper came out, the most important takeaway of this study is that high fructose in the diet is bad. Thank God. Thank you, Ron. Finally. It's not bad because it's more calories, but because it has effects on liver metabolism to make it worse at burning fat. As a result, adding fructose to the diet makes the liver store more fat, and this is bad for the liver and bad for whole body metabolism. Indeed. Couldn't agree more. Okay, just took him how many years to say it? And then, of course, we have the other addiction that we don't know is an addiction that we hand to children. Okay, and this my journey here started in 2007 because I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. I've been one for a long time, and I would see patients. And the mothers would have to bring the whole family with them. You know the story. Because, there's no babysitter, so, they got the patient and you got the whole family coming in. So you got all the kids, and they're blowing up the gloves, like balloons, and they're sticking each other in the eye with tongue depressors, generally being kids and making trouble, because that's what kids do. Being a pediatrician, you get used to it. And then, in 2007, something miraculous happened. The first mother, and I remember her well, came in with her kid, 7-year-old, but was wheeling her 15-month-old in the stroller, and the kid was playing with an iPad. And this kid was mesmerized. Mesmerized. And I got to have the whole discussion with the mother. And I said, "This is great! Oh my God! I can talk to the mom. She's listening to me. We can actually have a discussion, and it won't take so long, and I can see more patients. I get home early. Wow!" And then the next mother came in with the kid with the iPad. The next mother. By the fourth one, I thought to myself, maybe this isn't so great. And that, that got borne out over time, as you all know now. Okay, and this is, part of the problem. So is there such a thing as technology addiction? Not everybody believes it. If you talk to Andrew Schabelsky at the Oxford Internet Research Institute, he will tell you that I am full of crap. So the question is, what do the data show? So here's an example. This came out 2 weeks ago, January 17th. Okay? This is a meta-analysis. Okay? It says adolescent mental health in the digital age, facts, fears, and future directions. And what it talks about is narrative reviews and meta-analyses, so already garbage. Large-scale pre-registered cohort studies, longitudinal and ecological momentary assessment studies. Momentary assessment studies, that's already, throw it out. Okay? Specific focus on depression and anxiety, not addiction. They're not the same. Depression and anxiety, that's cortisol or serotonin. Addiction, that's dopamine. Different area of the brain, different set of receptors, different neurotransmitters. Correlational, focused on adults versus adolescents, so already a problem. Small associations between the amount of daily digital technology usage and adolescents' well-being that do not offer a way of distinguishing cause from effect and unlikely to be of clinical or practical significance. That's what it says. So you would read that and you would say, see, no, there's no technology addiction. But what you need to do is you need to be able to actually look at naive patients and see what happens going forward. And that's what this study over here on the right did. They looked at naive patients and they handed them Facebook and did it in a randomized control fashion. And what they found was that, yes, if you were depressed to start with, Facebook made you more depressed after a 2-week period. But everyone was more depressed. You can see the R value there. It was still significant. And for life satisfaction, yes, if you had decreased affect to start with, yes, you had decreased life satisfaction at the end, but in fact, even the average Facebook user had decreased. So when you do it with repeated measures and you do it in a controlled fashion and you do it across time in a large number of people, you can see the effect. And you see it in terms of emotional well-being and addiction. Correlation of Facebook addiction scores with activation of the nucleus accumbens, the reward center in the brain. You can see that right here. And this is the driver. So before 2006, before Facebook added the like button, a few people used it. You added the like button, it went ballistic. That was the thing that made it go viral, because now it was addictive. So the question is, how does that work? On this slide, this is probably the most important slide I'm going to show you tonight. On this slide, we have, on the left, the 15 happy apps. On the right, we have the 15 unhappy apps. I'm going to read them to you because they're far, it's hard to read. The happy apps: Calm, Google Calendar, Headspace, Insight Timer, the weather, Fitness, MyFitnessPal, Audible, Waze, Amazon Music, Podcasts, Kindle, Evernote, Spotify, Weather, and Canvas. You notice people aren't using the happy apps for very long. Kind of low in terms of usage, even though they're the happy apps. So what do those 15 happy apps have in common? One thing.
Information.
No like buttons.
Well, the information is
There's information in everything.
just that like Waze, once you found where you are, you don't need it anymore.
One-way apps.
Yeah.
The information goes from the app to the user and stays there. That's right. All of the happy apps are one-way apps. Now let's look at the unhappy apps. Okay? Grindr, Candy Crush Saga, Facebook, WeChat, Candy Crush, Reddit, Tweetbot, Weibo, Tinder, Subway Surf, 2 Dots, Instagram, Snapchat, 1010, and Clash Royale. So, the unhappy apps. People spend a lot more time on unhappy apps. Why are they spending more time on unhappy apps if they're unhappy? Because they're addicted, right. Thank you. So what do those 15 unhappy apps have in common? They are two-way apps. The information goes from the app to the user, back to the app, to another user, back to the app, and bang, bing, 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 ping, pong. That's called social networking. There's something inherent in the social networking that creates this. Now, in France, they know this because they have now banned cell phone use in schools, which I think is a very good idea. But we need more people to understand that and why. Have I explained the problem? Yes? No? Sort of. I haven't yet equated the problem with the metabolic and mental health and financial health. I'm going to do that now. So, what I would argue is that we've all been hacked. Our brains have been hacked because we don't know the difference between these two terms anymore, pleasure and happiness. Because we think pleasure is happiness, and it's not. So, can anyone here give me a difference between pleasure and happiness? Here are the 7 differences. Okay? Pleasure is short-lived, happiness is long-lived. Pleasure is visceral, you feel it in your body. Happiness is ethereal, you feel it above the neck. Pleasure is taking, happiness is giving. Pleasure is experienced alone, happiness is usually experienced in social groups. Pleasure is achievable with substances, happiness is not achievable with substances. The extremes of pleasure, whether it be substances or behaviors. So, all the chemical addictions we talked about, all the behavioral addictions, in the extreme, they lead to addiction. Oh, you can use them and not get addicted, true, but so many people do. Whereas you can't get addicted to too much happiness. And finally, number 7, pleasure is dopamine, hedonia, and happiness is serotonin, eudaimonia. So, these are 2 different systems in the brain. Okay? So here's the pleasure or reward pathway. Starts here in the midbrain in an area called the ventral tegmental area. This is where the dopamine cell bodies are. And dopamine is the pleasure neurotransmitter, the reward neurotransmitter, the learning transmitter. So when dopamine is released, and it is transduced in this area of the brain here called the nucleus accumbens, the reward center, when dopamine is released in that nucleus accumbens, you say, this feels good, I want more. Got it? That's what dopamine does. That's learning, and it's pleasure and reward all at the same time. This feels good, I want more. But what also happens is that dopamine activates this other area of the brain right over here called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex actually has a negative feedback loop with the nucleus accumbens, basically tamping it down so you don't go, this feels good, I'm going hog wild, no matter the consequences. The contentment pathway, or the happiness pathway, starts in a different area of the midbrain called the dorsal raphe nucleus. That's the home of the serotonin cell bodies. And serotonin, when it's released, it says, this feels good, I don't want or need anymore. You see the difference between dopamine and serotonin? I want more, I don't want or need anymore. Happiness, pleasure versus contentment. And you'll notice it innervates the entire brain, including the prefrontal cortex, but there's actually no negative feedback on that from the prefrontal cortex. There is an auto-feedback loop of the neuron on itself, but not from the prefrontal cortex, and that becomes important in a moment when we talk about the PFC. And finally, the stress-fear memory pathway. So, the amygdala, a walnut-shaped area in the temporal lobes, is your fear or your stress center. It's the part of your brain that goes bonkers when you walk down a dark alley at 3 in the morning. Okay? The hippocampus is this seahorse-shaped structure. It's where your memories are stored. That's where, when you put your hand down on a hot plate when you were 3 years old, that's where that memory is stored. It's also like, you're walking down that dark alley, you say, yeah, but I've walked this 10 times before. I know what's going on, I'll be okay. And then you also have the prefrontal cortex, which basically says, nothing's going to happen to me because nobody's jumping out. There's no ruffians waiting for me at the other end. Etc. Okay, so it's the thing that tamps down and provides some rationality to the fear. Everybody with me? In addition, there's a 4th area called the hypothalamus. That's the seat of all hormonal regulation. When it's activated, you make cortisol. The cortisol then bathes the entire brain and puts the brain on alert. So acutely, cortisol activates your central nervous system to be on alert So if you're doing an English, if you're taking an English test in school, that's a good thing because it basically heightens your capacity and your capabilities and increases blood glucose so that your cells have more energy so you can get through the test. So those are good things. If you're running away from the lion, that's a good thing because now you have more energy to be able to do so. But chronically, it causes the exact opposite. It basically takes your neurons down and causes them to need more energy when you're not getting it and actually can cause neuronal cell death, which you said was a problem. Now, in all three of these pathways, the reward, the contentment, and the stress-fear memory pathway, this part of the brain is pretty darn important, the prefrontal cortex. And you'll notice it is the front 2/3 of your frontal lobe. We have a big one. The other species don't. That's what makes us human. That's what makes them other species. Okay, they got the rest of the brain. They don't have the prefrontal cortex we do. So what does the prefrontal cortex do? It sees the future. That's what it does. Okay? It is the brake on all of these other parts of the brain that cause problems. So, currently we have problems with addiction, depression, anxiety, inattention, and hate. Yes? Mental health disorders across the board. The addiction, that's the nucleus accumbens. Depression, that's the dorsal raphe nucleus, as I showed you. Anxiety, that's the amygdala. Inattention, that's the associative cortex. And hate, that's the insula. That's the disgust, xenophobia, vomiting center, part of the limbic system. Okay? Do you really think we have 5 different brain areas that are defective all at the same time? No, we have one area of the brain that's defective, and it happens to be the brake on all these other 5. Again, you have to work upstream of the problem. And the upstream is that we have a dysfunctional prefrontal cortex that is now disinhibiting all of these others so that they are all now activated, causing problems. And we know that because you can measure it. So this is from fMRI studies looking at prefrontal cortex thickness and obesity against executive function. So you can see that the executive function goes down as the prefrontal cortex gets smaller. So we put this model together back when I wrote the book. Here are the 5 things that have happened to our society in the last 50 years. These 5. Technology, processed food, sugar, lack of sleep, drugs. Every one of those is a dopamine stimulator, which is why we engage in them. Because in some fashion they are rewarding. Now, dopamine causes reward, sure. Dopamine causes excitation. Whenever dopamine is released, the next neuron, the postsynaptic neuron, is excited. It's never an inhibitory stimulus, it's always an excitatory stimulus. Now, neurons like to be excited. That's why they have receptors in the first place. Okay. But neurons like to be tickled, not bludgeoned. Chronic overstimulation of any neuron leads to neuronal cell death. And I know that, and you know that, because as a pediatrician, I took care of a lot of kids with status epilepticus, non-stop seizures due to some epileptic focus. And we had to put these kids in the intensive care unit and put them into a pentobarbital coma just to stop their seizures, because the longer the seizures went on, the more neurons they lost and the more delayed they would end up. So, chronic overstimulation of a neuron is not a good thing. And the reason is because those neurons need more energy when they fire, and they have to reset, and they use up a lot of energy, and if you're not delivering it fast enough, guess what? They die. And when they die, they don't come back. So dopamine causes those neurons to die, eventually. So those neurons, those postsynaptic neurons, they don't want to die. They have a self-defense mechanism. They have a plan B. They downregulate the number of receptors. So it's less likely that any given molecule of dopamine will find a receptor to bind to, thereby reducing the firing rate, thereby reducing the gain, thereby reducing the chance that they will die. So dopamine downregulates its own receptor. Virtually everything in endocrinology downregulates its own receptor. There are only two exceptions to that, where there's a chain reaction where you get positive feedback instead of negative feedback. We can talk about that later if you want. Bottom line, more and more for less and less. And this is the phenomenon we call tolerance. And there are enough addiction specialists in the room to know what I'm talking about. Everybody with me? So you get a hit, you get a rush, receptors go down. Next time you need a bigger hit to get the same rush, and the receptors go down, and then a bigger hit, and a bigger hit, and a bigger hit, until finally you need a huge hit to get nothing. That's called tolerance. And then when the neurons do start to die, that's called addiction. Everybody got that? And that's why you need rehab, and you need basically abstinence, because it takes 3 weeks for those receptors to even return, which are a pretty unpleasant three weeks, right? And the problem is, once those neurons are dead, you will never get the amplitude of that response again, because they're not coming back. So, as you know, those of you who study and take care of addicted patients, you know that they will tell you they don't feel the same as they used to. And the reason is because they've lost dopamine neurons in the process. And so they feel unhappy because they don't get the dopamine buzz that they used to. So what do? They use again. So they go into relapse. The problem is they're using the same dose they used when they went into rehab, and then now they're dead because they basically overshot. And you know, whether it's Amy Winehouse or Philip Seymour Hoffman or Heath Ledger or anybody else, that's what's going on. The thing is, reward alone doesn't lead to addiction. You need stress too. So it's reward plus stress. Because what stress does, that cortisol, that's inactivating that prefrontal cortex that we talked about. Because that was the brake on this. So that's the thing that unleashes that dopamine to be able to kill those neurons. So it's not reward, it's not stress, it's reward plus stress. That leads to addiction. On the other side, we have all these 5 things. All of those lead to metabolic syndrome, all the diseases we talked about. And that's known to reduce serotonin synthesis. Well, guess what? Stress, cortisol, reduces the number of serotonin 1A receptors. So now you have fewer molecules, fewer receptors, less chance for an interaction, therefore less amplitude, therefore depression. So addiction and depression are 2 sides of the same coin, driven by 2 different areas of the brain, except they're both under the stress paradigm, and they're both being mediated by the same environmental stimuli. Everybody understand the relationship between these 2 pathways now, pleasure and happiness. Okay. So one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing is this gentleman named Philippe Gossier at University of Cergy-Pontoise. He's a robotics professor, but he's also a neurobiologist. He studies the hippocampus. His job is to make robots behave like humans. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but anyway, that's his job. And he wrote this paper back in 2017, basically a model for robotic metacognition. And I looked at this and I said, wait a second, this looks awfully familiar. Because you could take those different terms there and you could do it. And it would be the same. In fact, his model and our model are identical, which is why I'm working there, and we are building an addicted robot. How cool is that? Okay? We've already built the negative feedback pathways between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex with acute and adaptive cortisol and stress versus chronic and toxic cortisol and stress. And it works. It's kind of cool. Got to add the dopamine now. Okay, I've only been there a month. You know, we'll get there. Okay, but we're having fun. So, how did all of this happen in the last 50 years? And who did it? Because this is not just by accident. There's a real timeline and politics to this. It starts here. Okay, it starts with this guy. Okay? He was a smart guy, Aristotle was. Okay, fair? Yeah? Okay. Here's what he said. He said the pursuit of happiness and the avoidance of pain is a first principle, for it is for the sake of this that we do all that we do. Okay. But then it got bastardized. Somebody effed it up. And you know who effed it up? Happened right here. In fact, the founder of UCL, Jeremy Bentham. Everybody know who he is? He had Asperger's. Okay, and here's what he said. He went around quantifying happiness. He put an index on everything. Okay, he was the godfather of John Stuart Mill, utilitarianism, this notion that you could quantify happiness. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. Okay, that's sort of what Aristotle said, kind of. Benefit, advantage, pleasure, good, or happiness, all of which ultimately comes to the same thing. Now, it turns out Bentham's writings were the start by a guy named Menzies of the German stock exchange. And the German stock exchange was very successful, and it became the model for the American stock exchange. So this notion that pleasure and happiness were the same got built into the system because of this. And that developed into, at the time of the Depression, this notion. So this notion of gross domestic product, GDP. Who here thinks GDP is good? No one? Not one person? Really? Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay. It was invented in 1929 at the time of the Depression by a guy named Simon Kuznets, who very specifically warned against using it for the wrong purposes. The welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred from a measurement of national income. So here's the formula for GDP. It's consumption plus government plus investment plus exports minus imports. Okay, that's the formula. You can screw this up so many ways from Sunday, it's not even funny. So you can artificially inflate it through all sorts of different things, like economic bailouts. You know, the GDP went up during the 2008 economic crisis because we infused $777 billion into the economy to prop things up. Now, did that say that things were good? Things sucked. Okay, but GDP went up. It doesn't take into account environmental pollution or technology. It can't assess sustainability, like exhaust in cars and environmental stuff. And here's the thing that really is relevant to us. GDP is food plus pharma, but health is food minus pharma. So this is not measuring what we want it to measure. In fact, it is the exact opposite of what we want it to measure. But that's what our government is doing to ensure our financial health. Piece of shit. GDP turned us from individuals to consumers. And when we became consumers, we lost everything. Now, there are people who are reevaluating this, thank God. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner, wrote this in The Guardian, 3 weeks ago, I think. Yeah, December 3rd, two months ago. It's time to retire metrics like GDP. They don't measure everything that matters. Yeah, right. I agree. Iceland puts well-being ahead of GDP in the budget. Bhutan has gross national happiness. Who? Now it's Bhutan, not, whatever. Point is, it's real. Okay, this is the problem. This is where the problem came in, and this is why we have the problem. Also, John Maynard Keynes. We used his model from 1917 to 1970 in terms of how economies work, because he described the rational actor. And that's what we all assumed that people in economics were. Microeconomics, all irrational actors. He was a macroeconomics guy, but we took that and turned it into microeconomics. And here's what he said in 1930. When the accumulation of wealth is no longer of high social importance, there will be great changes in the code of morals. The love of money as a possession, as distinguished from the love of money as a means to the enjoyments and realities of life, will be recognized for what it is, a somewhat disgusting morbidity, one of those semi-criminal, semi-pathological propensities which one hands over with a shudder to the specialists in mental disease. That's you. And that was the rule till 1970. When what happened 50 years ago? This other guy showed up, named Milton Friedman, the Chicago School of Economics, which unfortunately won the day. And here's what he said. What does it mean to say that business has responsibilities? Only people can have responsibilities, except now, of course, corporations are people, right? A corporation is an artificial person, and in this sense may have artificial responsibilities. But business as a whole cannot be said to have responsibilities. A corporate executive is an employee of the owners of the business. He has direct responsibility to his employers. That responsibility is to conduct the business in accordance with their desires, which generally will be to make as much money as possible, because money is happiness. And that led to deregulation, which is why our environment is going down the friggin' tubes. Everybody got it? Okay. So, I would propose to you that this is not by accident. None of this happened by accident. This is actually willful. Industry-driven, government-sanctioned. It's a plot, not a conspiracy. A conspiracy would require collusion between industry actors. No, we don't have any data to support that. But what we have is this notion of market share. So any company that would do something different and would be successful, the other companies are going to basically emulate it, repeat it, to basically steal back market share. So everybody ended up doing the same thing anyway, not because they were colluding, but because they were all competing. Competition, not collusion. Okay, and it was engineered strictly with a profit motive. This is my favorite Dilbert of all time. You have Dilbert here, right?
Yeah.
Oh God, I love Dilbert. I am Dilbert. The MRI shows your brain has been hijacked by dopamine pirates. You are now under the full control of social media, corporations, gambling casinos, and big pharma. Are you writing me a prescription? No, I'm buying stock in those companies. Exactly right. So here's an example. Any happiness in that bottle? Sugar, dopamine. Caffeine, dopamine. Phosphoric acid. Caramel coloring, nope. Carbonated water, nope. Salt, no happiness in that bottle. How about a happy meal? Anything happy in there? Okay. Happy hour, 5 o'clock somewhere. You know where it's 5 o'clock every day? 5 o'clock at 10 o'clock on NBC News, because Hoda and Kathy Lee have the Today Show Happy Hour, where they drink on camera, which is particularly egregious since Hoda has breast cancer. I love this. Watch. Red Bull. Oh, Henry. Twix. Not done. Potato chips. Now we're done. Anything happy there?
It's a good song.
Huh? Just the song. Let's add some stress to the reward, because reward plus stress equals addiction. How about this? Do you have, you don't have commercials, do you have commercials for pharmaceuticals on TV?
No.
Oh, you're so lucky. Oh my God. Okay, that was Virginia versus Virginia Pharmacy Board, 1976. So that gave us this. Okay, but how about a little more stress?
That is ridiculous.
Sleep deprivation. Okay, all dopamine stimulators, all stressful. So has dopamine got us hooked on tech? Indeed it has, because of all the unhappy apps. In fact, there is a company in Los Angeles who will make your app addictive by introducing variable reward, therefore stress, therefore cortisol, into your app to increase engagement, and it is called Dopamine Labs. They know what they're doing. Okay, these are neuroscientists doing this. So, here we have in America the 10 most obese states in the nation. Okay? And North Carolina is one of them. Here we have the 10 laziest states. What's going on over there in Nevada? Guess you can only burn so much energy going like this. Here are the 10 most unhappy states. Now, so granted, this is all ecological, moment to moment, correlational. It's just fun. Here's the diabetes rate. Here's the heart disease rate. Here's the Alzheimer's disease rate. Here's the opioid use rate. Here's soda per capita consumption. So you could say, well, this is all poor. And yes, it is, because there's the poverty rate. But that's the point. Because this is the reward that the poor can afford. That's what made this jump. Okay? There's always been addiction. There's always been misery. There's always been unhappiness. The reason why this has gone viral, as it were, is because sugar is the addiction that everyone can afford. And not only that, but your grandmother is a pusher. So here we have U.S. Sugar consumption over the last 200 years. So our ancestors, getting fruits and vegetables out of the ground with occasional honey, consumed about 4 pounds of sugar per year. Nothing. Okay, here's the growth of the sugar industry during the 19th century, C&H, Domino, Tate and Lyle, etc. Stabilization prior to World War II, okay, when price equaled demand, supply equaled demand, sorry. Then we have the rationing of World War II, came back up to the same level, and then we had the introduction of processed food in the mid-1960s, which basically is all sugar. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay on this the percent of GDP spent on healthcare for the same period of time. Everybody ready?
Mm.
What do you see? That's when her healthcare costs started to go spiral out of control, when we changed the food. So, remember this slide? And how America sucks? It does. I'm not saying it doesn't, okay? But that's where processed food started. That's what took us off the road. This is the problem. So, technology, processed food, sugar, sleep deprivation, drugs. Dopamine, serotonin, addiction, depression, two sides of the same coin. Point is, we're not dealing with any of it. The secret to wellness is identifying the illness. This is the illness. And there's some epiphenomena that come from this too. This is a little off the beaten path, but as I watched what happened in the Senate yesterday, okay, which really ticked me off. My father worked for Fred Trump. It was his first job out of accounting school, so he knew Donald when he was 3-4 years old. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. So here we have the U.S. population based on high school and GED diplomas. And here we have college graduates, okay? And this is the Trump-Clinton map. And when you map them on, and it's been said, Trump voters are rural and, less educated, et cetera, well-known, et cetera. That's true. The question is, why do they think differently? And the answer is they do think differently. They cannot tell the difference between fake news and real news because it's been studied. They think fake news is real and real news is fake because they engage in intuitive reasoning, that is, reasoning without a prefrontal cortex, as opposed to deliberative reasoning, that is, reasoning with a prefrontal cortex. So their prefrontal cortices are working less well in order to be able to make such deliberations. And it's also why they also have an increase in opioid use in the same areas. So opioid use and the 2016 Trump campaign map onto each other quite tightly. Now, this is ecologic. This is moment in time. This is not causation. I understand it's correlation. Could be in a different epiphenomenon, but I think the prefrontal cortex is the problem here. I think we all are suffering from prefrontal cortical dysfunction because of all the things we've talked about tonight. This is the illness. So, wellness, what is the causality? Is it some other factor? I would argue that it's hedonics and consumerism. And that changed very specifically in the 1970s for all the reasons we've talked about tonight. And this is what the real problem is. And the problem is you cannot solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is. And you have to work upstream of the problem in order to solve it. So these are big problems. And they're not problems that you can just wave a magic wand to fix. And they're not problems where you can just help one individual and somehow that's going to solve anything. Because they're still going back to the same environment. And if they're going back to the same environment, it's, it's like, expecting somehow an alcoholic to be able to work in a bar. Just doesn't work. And of course, this is not new. We've known about this for a while. Okay, here are two examples. Brave New World from 1932. Okay, he got it wrong because he said it was the year 2540, not the year 2020. Okay, and Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, also British. Okay, what's new though, from all of these is that now everyone's exposed, whereas it used to be reward was hard to get, now it's easy to get. Everyone can afford it, and individuals can be specifically targeted because of technology. That's what's different. So what can we do personally? Because societally we've got a big problem, but what can we do personally? This is where the whole last section of the book, Hacking, talks about the 4 C's. Basically, we got to do 3 things. We got to tamp down dopamine, tamp down cortisol, and raise serotonin. That's what we got to do. So what can do that? There ain't no drug for that. No drug. And never will be. So how do you do it? Well, it turns out there are 4 ways to do it. And it turns out they're all things your mother told you. But you forgot while you were, using your iPad, drinking a Coca-Cola. Okay? And they're all free. So,
Good sleep.
you don't get your money back because you didn't spend it. We're going to go there.
Right.
So the first C, connect. So connect is not Facebook. Connect is eye-to-eye, face-to-face connection. Why does it have to be eye-to-eye, face-to-face? You have a set of neurons in the back of your head in your occipital lobe called mirror neurons. You can record from them. Torsten Wiesel first noticed them, worked on the visual cortex way back when. Turns out, when those neurons are activated, they generate serotonin. So, you are reading the facial expressions of the person you are talking to in real time. And that is what's generating your emotion. It's what's generating this thing we call empathy. And that's associated with serotonin. Paul Ehrlich, famous UC Berkeley psychologist, went to Papua New Guinea. They have the exact same facial expressions for the same emotions. They'd never seen a white person, but they had the same emotions we did, and they had the same facial expressions, baked into our DNA. It's how we communicated before there was language. And it's all over the world, irrespective of, UK, US, da-da-da. Okay? Everyone's got it, because it's how people communicated primitively. We're communicating primitively right now. And we are generating empathy because of it, which is upping our serotonin. And you don't get it out of digitalization. You don't get it out of Facebook. All you get is dopamine. Everybody got it? Now, religion is a perfectly good example to explain how this works. There are 4,200 religions in the world. 4,200. Okay, they all share one thing in common. What is it? One thing all 4,200 religions have.
Well, some sort of concept of a higher power.
Huh?
So, but they're not solipsistic, there's some sort of idea of something outside of yourself. By definition, relationship, well, I think
Connection with
that's
others in the same religious group.
Huh?
Connection with others in the same group.
A meeting place.
Yeah.
There's a meeting place. For all religions, there's a meeting place. That's where the serotonin gets done. Then, of course, the pastor or the rabbi or the imam opens their big fat trap, and now you got dopamine. Okay, you get both. Interpersonal connection activates those mirror neurons that are responsible for empathy, which is required for serotonin generation. Social media only generates dopamine, not serotonin. And Facebook use leads to social isolation and depression because serotonin goes down. Sherry Turkle, a media watcher at MIT, famously coined the term alone together, which is what we have. And she also said, if you don't teach your children how to be alone, they will always be lonely. Truer words were never spoken. As a pediatrician, I can vouch for that. Number 2, contribute. And that does not mean to your retirement account. That means outside of yourself. Okay? To others in some fashion. Okay? Padding your bank account does not work because money is not serotonin, period. Those who value financial success actually derive less contentment because there's never enough. Anybody know Richard Layard? He's a British economist. Did a famous study, asked a bunch of college students, which would you rather have? $50,000 and everyone else gets $25,000, or $100,000 and everyone else gets $200,000. What do you think they said?
50 and 25.
50-25. Why? You're shortchanging yourself by half.
But your relative spending power.
Yeah, right, because it's not about you, it's about it's about you relative to everyone else. Okay? That's the point. Okay? That's why money doesn't work. It's exactly why money doesn't work. Spending money on yourself increases pleasure, makes you a consumer, no argument there, but spending money on others actually makes you an individual and increases happiness and serotonin. Can you derive happiness from your work? The answer is yes, you can. So that's okay, because God knows that's how I get it. Okay? But two provisos. You have to see that your work helps others, and others have to be able to see it too, like your boss. If your boss doesn't see it, you are screwed. Altruism, volunteerism, philanthropy for those who don't get it at work. Okay, that'll work. Anything that contributes to the greater good all generates serotonin and emotional well-being. Okay, but we have fewer and fewer people engaging in volunteerism and philanthropy today. Number 3, cope. And cope is 3 things: sleep, mindfulness, and exercise. And they all do one thing. 3 modalities do one thing: lower cortisol. They're all stress reducers on purpose. They're all good. Sleep deprivation increases amygdala function and cortisol output, and therefore inhibits prefrontal cortical function. 35% of adults get less than 7 hours of sleep per night, and 23% of them have chronic insomnia. And some of those have obstructive sleep apnea, which makes it even worse. And I can talk about how that ultimately impacts on metabolic health. I'm giving that talk next week. And caffeine reduces sleep and increases your dopamine, so that's not helping any. But take my Starbucks away from me and I will friggin' kill you. And the most dangerous word in the English language is multitasking. Everyone has to multitask today in order to get a job. If you can't multitask, you can't have a job. The problem is only 2.5% of the population can actually do it. The other 97.5% are serially unitasking. And every time they switch from one task to another, they lose 23 minutes of concentration time and they get a cortisol bump. So what do you think that's doing? The Whitehall study showed us what increased cortisol does. It kills you. Screens are the antithesis of sleep. The stress, the blue light. Kids who charge their cell phone in their room get 28 minutes less sleep per night than kids who charge their cell phone outside their room. And smartphone apps for wellness have not yet shown any benefit. Not one of them. Not MyFitnessPal, not Calm, not any of them. Okay, they will sound good, but no one's actually shown benefit. Mindfulness, on the other hand, activates the prefrontal cortex because you are focused. You have to focus on nothing. You know how hard that is, to focus on nothing? It's actually quite difficult, but it improves metabolic health and alleviates depression, and we actually showed that in an obesity study in 2015. And exercise is as good as SSRIs at alleviating depression, and it's additive with mindfulness. So if you do mindfulness and exercise, you don't even need SSRIs. You fix the whole problem. And finally, number 4, cook. So why does food matter? So processed food is low tryptophan. Tryptophan is the rarest amino acid in the diet. It's the precursor to serotonin. You have to eat it. You can't make it. And 99.5% of the tryptophan ends up elsewhere, not in your brain. So getting serotonin up into your brain is actually kind of a hard deal. It's kind of a difficult process. So you need tryptophan. So where do you get tryptophan? Eggs, poultry, fish. Not exactly processed food. Also not exactly vegan. Omega-3 fatty acids, which cause neuronal membrane stabilization, make it less likely that neurons die. So that's good, but where do you get omega-3s from? Salmon, flax, marine life. High sugar. Well, we've already talked about that in terms of addiction and metabolic syndrome, and low fiber, which causes rapid absorption. Okay? And also increases inflammation, because fiber gets converted by colonic bacteria to short-chain fatty acids, which suppress inflammation and lower your IL-6. But the problem is 1/3 of Americans don't know how to cook. I don't know about here in the UK. Maybe you know the answer, but it's probably about the same. Yes? And the problem is if you don't know how to cook, then that means your kid doesn't know how to cook, which means you and your kid and the rest of you, for the rest of your life, you are hostage to the food industry. And that was their plan from the beginning, because we have it in the food industry documents at UCSF. The good news is the real food movement is in high gear. Companies who don't change will be left in the dust, unless, of course, they just buy all the startups and kill them, catch and kill, which they're doing. Nestle, Unilever, Mars, and Danone have signed a public letter committing to change. Haven't seen it yet. Haven't seen the change, but they've committed to change. Now, if you cook for yourself and your family and put a meal on the table, you are connecting, contributing, coping, and cooking all at the same time. And that is what has really been lost. We can't even get kids to sit at the table, never mind eat at the table. So with that, I'm going to finish. Fat Chance is about diet and physical health. Hacking the American Mind is about diet and behavioral health. A new book is coming in a year, as Kiki mentioned, about processed food. It will be the manifesto for real food. It will be everything that's wrong with our current food system and all it does to us, to our economy, and to our environment in an attempt to try to actually move the needle and fix the problem. Because I will tell you right now, government doesn't want to fix the problem because they're addicted to the money. And that is the illness. So with that,